The door swings open before he even knocks. That's the first thing that throws him off. 3 men in black suits, standing at the edge of a cracked concrete path. Black SUVs parked at the curb like sentinels. Morning sun cutting sideways through the trees. And the house. Peeling blue paint, a sagging porch that looks like it's been holding its breath for years. Staring back at them like it already knows why they came. Zaire Ashfordvoss doesn't move. He just looks. His brothers, Keston and Damon, identical down to the slight tension in their jaws, flank him on either side. Same height, same build, same unreadable expression trained through years of never letting anyone see the inside of their heads. The 3 of them don't visit places like this. They send people. But the report that landed on Zaire's desk 3 nights ago had been specific. An Omega, 3 children, no PAC registration, no affiliation on record, no digital trail beyond a single utility bill. And this location that pinged on a database flagged for syndicate leaks 5 years back. That's not a coincidence. That's a message. So he came himself. The door is open now, and the man standing in it doesn't look surprised. He looks ready, like he knew this was coming and spent every day since preparing for exactly this moment. He's lean but not frail. Dark hair, dirt-stained shirt, eyes that don't drop, don't flinch, don't ask for permission to hold their ground. Selim Osei doesn't speak. He never speaks. But the weight of what he communicates with his posture alone fills the entire porch. 3 small boys press against his sides. The oldest, or what seems like the oldest by maybe 6 seconds, grips a yellow toy truck in both hands. The second holds a notebook to his chest like a shield. The third stands slightly behind Selim's left arm, just one eye visible, watching. All 3 of them are blonde. That detail lands somewhere in Zaire's chest before his brain catches up to it. He clears his throat. "We're not here to cause problems," he says. His voice comes out flatter than he intends. "We just need answers." Selim doesn't move. Keston steps half a foot forward, instinct more than strategy. "We know you've been in this county for 4 years without registration. You understand why that raises questions." Still nothing. Damon exhales through his nose. He's the quietest of the 3, but that usually means he's already 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the conversation. His eyes drift from Selim down to the children, then back. He doesn't say anything either, but something crosses his face. Quick, almost invisible, and he looks at Zaire. Zaire is already staring at the boy with the truck. The boy is staring back, not scared, not confused. His small jaw is set in a way that looks familiar, in a way Zaire cannot immediately name or locate or explain. The child tilts his head, just slightly. Blue eyes. Sharp. Calm. The kind of calm that doesn't belong on a 4-year-old's face. It belongs on a leader's. Something shifts inside Zaire's chest. Not recognition, not yet, but the feeling right before recognition. The feeling of standing at the edge of a thought you don't want to finish. He pulls his gaze away. "We'll come back," he says. Not a threat. Not a question. A statement. He turns. His brothers fall in beside him. The SUV doors open, and just before the door to the blue house swings shut behind them, the boy with the truck looks up one more time, and doesn't look away. Hi viewers. Here's a question I genuinely want you to answer in the comments. If you found out someone had been hiding something life-changing from you for 5 years, would you want the truth all at once? Or would you need time to handle it piece by piece? Zaire gets into the passenger seat. Keston pulls out of the curb. The house shrinks in the side mirror. And the thought Zaire didn't want to finish, the one that started the moment those eyes locked onto his, finishes itself anyway. Quiet, certain, unavoidable. Why do his eyes feel like mine? 5 years ago, Zaire Ashfordvoss never waited for anything. He arrived. Things happened. He left. That was the order of his world, and that order had never once broken. Not in business, not in negotiations, not in the kind of rooms where the wrong word got people buried without ceremony. The Nakova Gala was not supposed to be any different. It was a syndicate fundraiser dressed up as a charity event. 3 floors of marble, string quartets, and people spending money to look like they weren't spending money. The kind of room where power sat in silence and smiled at itself. Zaire had attended 7 of these. He remembered none of the faces. He was going to remember this one. The catering staff moved like shadows. Efficient. Invisible by design. Zaire had already identified 3 potential threats in the room and dismissed 2 of them by the time he reached the balcony. The 3rd was still being monitored by Damon from across the floor. He needed air. The balcony was narrow. Stone railing. City lights below. And one person already standing there. Back against the far pillar, Trey balanced on one arm, staring out at nothing in particular. Catering uniform. Dark hair. Still. Most people heard Zaire coming and adjusted. Stood straighter. Moved away. Performed whatever version of themselves they thought he wanted to see. This one didn't move at all. Zaire stepped to the railing. Looked out at the city. Said nothing. 30 seconds passed. The catering worker set the tray down on the small ledge beside the pillar. Slowly. Without looking over. Without any of the usual tell of someone pretending not to notice a powerful person next to them. Zaire turned his head slightly. "You're not going back inside?" The worker looked at him. No name tag visible. Young. The kind of face that held things in rather than letting them out. He opened his mouth and closed it. Reached into his shirt pocket. Pulled out a small worn notepad and a pen. Wrote 3 words. Held it up. "Not right now." Zaire looked at the notepad. Then at him. "You can't speak." The worker held his gaze. Shook his head. Slow. No apology in it. Most people looked away from Zaire after about 4 seconds. This one held for 10 and then simply looked back out at the city. As if Zaire's presence was interesting but not overwhelming. As if power was something this person had already factored into his understanding of the world and decided was only one of many things worth noting. That shouldn't have been enough to hold Zaire's attention. It held it completely. "How long have you worked this event circuit?" Zaire asked. The notepad again. 2 years. "You choose the work?" A pause. Then the worker wrote. "Chose what works." Zaire almost smiled. He didn't, but almost. The conversation happened in short bursts across the next 40 minutes. Notes passed. Zaire talking in short questions. The worker, he still hadn't gotten a name, answering in even shorter written lines. It wasn't a conversation most people would call significant. No revelations. No dramatic disclosures. But something was happening underneath it. This person wasn't performing quiet. He actually was quiet. There was a difference. Zaire had been around enough manufactured versions to know the real one when it stood 6 feet away from him and refused to be impressed. Keston appeared at the balcony door. He gave Zaire the signal. Meeting in 30 minutes. 3rd floor back room. Zaire held up 2 fingers. 2 more minutes. Keston's face shifted. Barely. And he stepped back inside. The worker started gathering his tray. "Name," Zaire said. "The notepad." "Selim." Zaire looked at it. Nodded. "I'm." Selim wrote before he could finish. "I know who you are." Then he looked up. And for the first time something moved behind his eyes, not fear. Not admiration. Caution. He picked up the tray. Walked back inside. Door closed. Zaire stood on the balcony alone. The city lights were the same. The air was the same. Nothing about the physical world had changed. But the meeting on the 3rd floor felt, for the first time in years, like an interruption. He didn't plan to stay at the gala past midnight. But he didn't leave until almost 2. And Selim was gone before he could find him a second time. But not before one thing happened. Not before Zaire turned in the hallway near the service exit and found Selim there. Tray gone. Coat on. Ready to leave. They stood in that hallway for a moment. No words possible on one side. No words chosen on the other. And still something passed between them. Real and unguarded and gone too fast. Zaire didn't reach out. Didn't stop him. Selim walked out into the night. And Zaire stood in the hallway thinking he'd find the man again when things settled down. He didn't plan to stay caught in that thought all week. But he didn't plan to leave it behind either. He went back the next morning. Not to the gala, that was over, but to the catering company listed on the event contract. Zaire had the address inside of 2 hours. A clean, mid-size operation out of the east side. Corporate-facing front, mostly contract staff on rotation. He didn't go himself. He sent Keston, which was almost the same thing. Keston came back with nothing useful. No Selim on their current roster. The name was there briefly in a temp placement file from 8 months back. One event. The Nakova Gala was not on his record. Like it had been quietly removed. Not deleted, removed. There was a difference. Deletion left traces. Removal required someone with access. That was the first flag. Zaire looked at the file gap for longer than he should have. He told himself it wasn't personal. It was a pattern irregularity. He didn't like pattern irregularities. That was his reason for pushing on it. He told himself that for about 4 days. By day 5, he'd pulled the security footage from the Nakova building. The balcony camera covered a 60-degree angle. He could see himself at the railing. He could see the moment he turned to speak to someone beside him. The footage showed no one beside him. The angle was clean. No obstruction. No glitch visible in the metadata. The timestamp was continuous. But the space next to Zaire on that balcony, the space where Selim had been standing for 40 minutes, was empty, like he hadn't been there at all. Zaire sat back in his chair. That was the second flag. He pulled the hallway footage. The service exit corridor. Same result. Timestamp intact. No corruption visible. And no Selim walking out into the night. Just Zaire. Standing alone. Looking at a closed door. Damon reviewed the footage independently. Didn't say anything for a long time after. Then, someone scrubbed this. Not locally, remotely. After the fact. Who has access to the building system? Zaire asked. 3 parties. The venue. The event coordinator. And whoever hired the event coordinator. The event coordinator for the Nakova Gala was a shell entity. 2 layers deep into a corporate structure that dissolved 6 weeks after the event. By the time Zaire's team traced it to a viable address, the office was vacant. No forwarding information. Wall. Every door closed. And that should have been the end of it. There were bigger things happening. The syndicate fracture that had been building since the previous year was accelerating. Loyalties were splitting along lines that had seemed solid for a decade. There was no time for a missing name in a temp staffing file. Except Zaire kept returning to it. Not obsessively. Methodically. He told himself. He ran one more trace. Broader. Demographic search. The name Selim Osei, unusual enough to narrow results, pulled 3 possible matches nationally. 2 were accounted for easily. The third had a clean address 14 months prior. Then nothing. No lease renewal. No forwarding address. No utility transfers. No employment records after a specific date. A specific date that landed 2 days after the Nakova Gala. Zaire looked at that date for a long time. Something tightened in his chest that he didn't immediately name. He filed it. Moved on. The syndicate situation required full attention. He had 2 territories to stabilize and a council session that was going to turn ugly before it turned resolved. Weeks passed. Then months. The trace on Selim Osei sat in a closed folder on a secured drive. Zaire didn't open it again for 4 years. He didn't need to, because 4 years later, the report with the location of a small blue house in a quiet county came across his desk. And the name at the top of that report was the same. But what he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing from that folder or that report or any of the security footage that had been so cleanly erased, was what had happened to Selim in the days immediately after he walked out of that gala. What had hit him in the weeks that followed. What he had been carrying alone since then. And what that weight had cost him. Because the morning after the Nakova Gala, 48 hours after a hallway moment that lasted less than 30 seconds, Selim Ose sat in a bathroom of a rented room he could barely afford, hands gripping the edge of the sink, looking at something he hadn't expected, hadn't planned for, hadn't built a single wall strong enough to protect against. And fear, the real kind, the kind that bypasses thought and lands straight in the body, replaced every other feeling he had. All at once, in one breath, he had 8 days to decide. That's what it felt like. 8 days between the moment the test confirmed what he already sensed and the moment the first person connected to the syndicate came asking questions about the gala's catering staff. Not Zaire. Not directly, but someone sent by someone. Low-level inquiry. Casual enough to look like routine. Pointed enough that Selim, who had spent 3 years learning to read the difference, understood immediately what it meant. Move. So he moved. Not in panic. Panic left traces. He moved in the quiet, methodical way he had taught himself to do everything, with a plan, with patience, and with the kind of discipline that only comes from a life that never offered the option of falling apart. He had $340, a storage unit key, and a contact 2 states over who owed him a favor that had nothing to do with the syndicate. He called in the favor. The contact, a woman named Beryl, who ran a small-town diner and kept her business in cash because she'd learned that lesson the hard way. Let him use an address. Not her home. A small rental property she hadn't listed. Isolated. Quiet. The kind of place that didn't appear on GPS unless you already had the road name. Selim was there within 72 hours. He had nothing, which meant he had everything he needed to start building. He found work within 2 weeks. Off-book, the way most things worked in towns where everybody knew each other and nobody wanted the paperwork. Construction cleanup. Hauling. Occasional kitchen shifts at Beryl's diner. She paid extra because he was reliable and never late, and never once made her feel like she owed him more than she'd agreed to. The months that followed were not easy. They were not supposed to be. He wasn't running towards something comfortable. He was running towards something survivable. And he survived. The pregnancy progressed the way these things do, with weight and exhaustion and a specific kind of physical reality that no amount of planning can fully prepare you for. He adapted. He ate what he could afford. He slept when the work let him. He kept his head down and his routine tight and his presence in the town small enough that no one had a reason to look twice. The children came on a cold morning in early spring. Not 1. Not 2. 3. The midwife, a retired nurse named Dorothea who Beryl had called in as a personal favor, didn't say much when it was over, just looked at Selim with an expression somewhere between professional calm and quiet astonishment. 3 boys. Healthy. Loud in the way newborns are loud, which is total and immediate and completely consuming. Selim held all 3 of them in the first hour. One at a time, then together, shifting carefully. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in years, not from hardness, but from a specific kind of practice. Feeling things fully and quietly without performance. He felt this, every part of it. He named them that same day. Ezra, Solomon, Micah. Names that carried weight without demanding explanation. The years that followed built themselves around those 3. Routine became armor. Wake early. Feed. Work while Beryl's neighbor watched the boys in the mornings. Return by afternoon. Cook what stretched. Fix what broke. The porch steps, the kitchen faucet, the window latch that never quite caught right. Sleep when he could. And watch them grow. That was the part he hadn't fully prepared for. Not the difficulty of it. The specificity. Ezra was the bold one. He walked first. Talked first. Though Selim couldn't respond in kind, Ezra didn't seem to need the verbal confirmation. He watched his father's face and understood. Solomon was the quiet one. He preferred observation. He'd sit and watch something. A beetle on the porch, the way wind moved through the grass, the expression on a stranger's face. Long past the point where other children moved on. Micah was the careful one. He touched everything gently, put things back where he found them, never rushed. 3 different people, born the same morning, shaped by the same silence, and shaped by something else too. Something Selim noticed the way you notice a sound you can't identify. Not alarming, not clear, just present. The way they carried themselves, the posture, the stillness when something caught their attention, the instinct to position unconsciously automatically with the oldest in front. It wasn't something he taught them. He was certain of that. Which meant it came from somewhere else, someone else. And that thought, quiet, persistent, growing louder with every passing month, sat in the back of Selim's mind like a stone he couldn't move. Because they didn't just look like him. They carried his presence. He came back the next day. No warning. No call. There was no number to call. Just the black SUV at the curb again, mid-morning, and Zaire Ashfordvoss standing at the end of the concrete path like he'd been there for hours already. Alone this time. No Keston. No Damon. Just him. Selim saw him from the kitchen window and went completely still. His hands were in dishwater. He didn't lift them out. He just stood there, looking through the glass at the figure at the end of the path. The boys were eating. Solomon was reading a book balanced against his cereal bowl. Micah was stacking crackers in an architecture that had no practical purpose and complete structural logic. Ezra was watching the window, because Ezra always saw things first. Selim dried his hands, stepped out onto the porch. Zaire looked up. Something crossed his face, quick, practical, and then flattened back into control. He didn't approach the steps. He stayed at the bottom of the path. "I'm not here to escalate anything," he said. Selim waited. "I just want to understand what I'm looking at." That was the thing about Zaire that Selim had not forgotten in 5 years. He didn't say more than he meant. Most powerful men covered their uncertainty with volume. Zaire went the other direction. Fewer words. Heavier weight. Selim crossed his arms. Stayed on the porch. "I'll be direct," Zaire said. "The records don't add up. The timeline doesn't add up. I'm not going to pretend I came here for routine compliance follow-up. That's not why I'm here." He stopped. Selim said nothing. "I came back because I'm trying to understand something that doesn't have a clean answer yet." He left it there. The day passed with Zaire in the yard. Not inside. Selim didn't open that door, literally or otherwise. But Zaire didn't leave. He sat on the stone wall at the property edge. Watched the road. Made 2 phone calls that he stepped further away to take. The boys came outside after lunch. Ezra spotted Zaire immediately and changed direction without breaking stride, moving toward the far end of the yard. Solomon glanced up from his book, evaluated the situation with the efficiency of someone 3 times his age, and went back to reading closer to the porch where Selim stood. Micah walked in a long, slow arc around the yard that just happened to bring him within about 15 feet of Zaire. Then stopped. Looked. Zaire looked back. Selim watched all of it from the porch without moving. Micah turned around and came back. Over the next hour, Zaire said nothing to the boys. Didn't approach. Didn't call out. But he watched, and Selim could see him watching with the kind of attention that wasn't casual. It was the attention of someone cataloging, recording, building a picture from small details because the large ones were being kept from him. He came back the following morning. And the morning after that. Same routine. The wall at the property edge. Present but not pushing. Patient in a way that felt, to Selim, more calculated than genuine. But on the 4th day, Ezra did something unexpected. He walked directly across the yard. Stopped 6 feet from Zaire. Set his toy truck on the ground between them. Looked up. Zaire looked down. The 2 of them stayed like that for a long moment, the child and the man, without either of them moving. And then Ezra picked the truck back up, turned around, and walked back to the porch like a decision had been made. Selim watched Zaire's face during that exchange, and saw something shift. Not alarm, not strategy, something quieter than that. Something that had no business being on that face. On the face of a man who ran entire territories with a phone call and enforced loyalty with a look. That evening, as the light dropped low over the yard and the boys were inside washing up for dinner, Zaire stood and walked to the foot of the porch steps. He looked at Selim. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and you don't have to answer tonight." Selim waited. "But I need you to know that I've been paying attention." He said nothing else. Turned. Walked to the SUV. Drove away. Selim stood on the porch for a long time after the car disappeared. The town was quiet. The yard was still. Inside, he could hear 3 small voices. Micah counting something, Solomon correcting him gently, Ezra ignoring both of them. 3 voices. 3 boys who moved through the world with a weight they didn't know they were carrying. And Selim stood in the dark knowing that the question Zaire hadn't asked yet, the one building in the space between every visit, was the one question that, once spoken out loud, would change everything. For all of them. Because Zaire wasn't just observing anymore. He was starting to know. And the part that kept Selim awake that night, the part he couldn't push down or reason through, wasn't that Zaire was getting closer to the truth. It was that one of the boys had already started watching for the black SUV in the mornings, and smiling when it appeared. This wasn't coincidence. Not anymore. The report landed on Zaire's desk at 6:14 in the morning. He hadn't slept. He'd been sitting in the same chair since 2 a.m., not reviewing files, not making calls, just sitting, which was not something Zaire Ashfordvoss did. Sitting without purpose was a version of losing, and he didn't lose. But the visits to the Blue House had done something to his thinking, disrupted it, made it run in directions he hadn't authorized. So when his investigator, a man named Cortez Beaumont who had never once brought him incomplete information in 11 years, placed the folder on the desk and said, quietly, carefully, "There are gaps I can't close." Zaire felt something that wasn't quite anger. It was closer to recognition. He opened the folder. Selim Osei, age 26, no criminal record, no PAC registration, no affiliated syndicate history. Clean, which by itself was unusual because in their world, everyone had something. Even the people who weren't involved had a thread that connected them to someone who was. Nothing. The catering placement from 5 years back. Gone, they already knew that. The utility bill that first flagged the location. Standard. The rental agreement for the Blue House. Paid in cash, monthly, through a third party that traced back to a woman named Beryl who ran a diner 2 towns over and had no connection to anything Zaire's operation had ever touched. 3 children. No birth certificates on file in the county system. A note from Cortez. Possible registration under alternate jurisdiction. Could not confirm. No birth certificates. Zaire set the folder down. Looked at the wall. That's when the logic started building. The wrong logic, as it turned out, but it felt clean at the time. It felt like the only explanation that made everything fit. This was deliberate. All of it. The erased footage from the gala. The vanishing employment record. The cash payments. The missing certificates. The location, rural, low traffic, the kind of county where people minded their business because they expected the same in return. Someone had set this up. Not out of fear. Out of strategy. And the question that followed. The one that felt to Zaire like the only logical next question was, strategy for what? What was the play? Because there was always a play. In his world, nothing happened without a reason tied to leverage. People disappeared to resurface later with something to sell. People hid children to establish claims. People built quiet lives in remote counties to stay off radar until the moment was right to step back onto it. He turned it over. All of it. And by the time the sun came up, he had a conclusion. Selim Osei had run from the gala for a reason. Had covered his tracks with professional-grade precision. Had avoided every system that would have flagged him. Not because he was afraid, but because he was preparing. The children were part of it. That was the thought. Right or wrong, and it was wrong, deeply wrong, in a way Zaire wasn't yet equipped to understand. It was the thought that settled into place and hardened. He called Cortez back in. Start a quiet background poll, Zaire said. Anyone who's had contact with the Osei household in the last 4 years. Beryl, whoever she is. The midwife, if there was one. Anyone. Cortez wrote it down. Approach. Invisible, Zaire said. I don't want him to know we're looking. Cortez left. And Zaire sat back in his chair with the cold satisfaction of someone who believed they were finally gaining ground. That feeling. The one that comes right before you realize the ground you're standing on is not what you thought it was. Held for exactly 4 days. Because on the 4th day, Cortez came back. Placed a second folder on the desk. Thinner than the first. The midwife's retired. Out of state. Clean. Beryl has no ties to any network we track. The neighbors are exactly what they look like. Regular people. He paused. And the birth certificates. Zaire looked up. Filed, Cortez said. All 3. Different county. About 60 miles east. Filed correctly. Legally sound. No anomalies. Zaire said nothing. I couldn't find a play, Cortez said carefully. Whatever this is, it doesn't look like a setup. He left the folder and walked out. Zaire stared at the second folder for a long time. The clean logic from 4 days ago was still there. Still felt like it should be right. But the facts weren't cooperating. And facts, in Zaire's experience, didn't lie to protect feelings. Something was off, not with Selim's story, with his own reading of it. It happened on a Thursday, late afternoon. The light in the yard was going gold and long. The boys had been outside since 3, Ezra chasing something in the grass, Micah reorganizing rocks along the fence line with the focused energy of someone executing a plan. Solomon sitting cross-legged near the porch with his book open but his eyes drifting more than reading. Zaire was at the stone wall. He'd been coming every day for 2 weeks now. The routine had settled into something that nobody had formally agreed to. Selim hadn't invited him closer, hadn't turned him away either, just maintained the distance like a line drawn in the ground, visible to both of them, respected by both, not yet crossed. Zaire had stopped pushing. That was new. He was learning slowly, with some resistance, that pushing in this particular situation produced nothing. Selim didn't respond to pressure the way other people did. He went quieter, stiller, more internal, like a door that locked tighter the harder you pulled on it. So Zaire waited. He was looking at his phone when it happened. Not watching, actually reading something, which meant his guard had dropped in a way it almost never did in a space he didn't control. The sound reached him first. A sharp crack of sneaker sole against loose concrete. A small body pitching forward. Then the particular quality of silence that follows a child falling. That half second before the wailing starts or doesn't start. He moved before he decided to. 6 feet. Fast. Low. Ezra hit his arms instead of the ground. It wasn't a practiced catch. It was instinct, hands out, bending at the knee, absorbing the momentum. Ezra's chin missed the concrete by the width of a breath. The yellow toy truck skittered off to the left and landed in the grass. For a second, neither of them moved. Ezra pulled his head back and looked at Zaire's face from about 8 inches away. Not scared, not crying, just looking. The way the boy looked at things. Direct, unhurried, like he was deciding something. Zaire's chest was doing something it had no business doing. Some mechanical response that started in the sternum and radiated outward. Something he hadn't felt in so long he didn't immediately have a name for it. He set Ezra upright carefully, both feet on the ground. Ezra didn't step back. He looked down at Zaire's sleeve, at the spot where his small hand had grabbed it during the fall. Still gripping it, not consciously, just holding on the way children hold things before they know they're doing it. Zaire looked at that hand. He did not move. Across the yard, Selim had taken 3 steps off the porch. He'd stopped, standing there, not intervening, but every part of him was locked onto this moment. The posture of someone who wanted to cross the distance and was holding themselves still by decision. Micah had turned from the fence. Solomon had closed his book. Nobody spoke. Ezra finally lifted his face again. He tilted his head. That same tilt from the first day. That gesture that had landed somewhere in Zaire's chest like a key turning in a lock, and looked at him with a clarity that no 4-year-old should have access to. And then he said it. Soft. Matter of fact. No drama in it at all. You smell like home. 3 words. And the yard went so quiet that Zaire could hear the grass moving. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Not because he didn't have words. He had too many, all of them arriving at once and none of them remotely adequate. He looked up from Ezra's face and across the yard to Selim. Selim was already looking at him. And for the first time in 5 years, in all the time since a balcony and a notepad and a closed service door, Selim's face broke, not into tears, into something worse, recognition. He couldn't stop coming. That was the part Zaire couldn't rationalize anymore. He tried. Twice he told himself he would take a day, just one day, to reset the dynamic. Step back. Create distance. Return to the kind of clear-headed analysis that had kept him operational for 15 years without a single move he regretted. Both times, he'd been at the stone wall by mid-morning. Something had broken open in him on Thursday in that yard. He knew what it was. He wasn't ready to say it. So instead, he did what he always did when he couldn't face a thing directly. He moved around it. Increased the pressure. Asked more questions. Tried to get Selim to speak through the silence in some way that didn't require Zaire to examine what Ezra's 3 words had done to him. The visits got longer. More direct. He started sitting on the porch steps. Not inside, still not invited inside, but closer. He asked Selim questions that required written answers because he knew written answers took longer and gave him more time to study the face of a person he was increasingly unable to categorize. Selim answered some, didn't answer others. The ones he didn't answer weren't hostile refusals, they were considered ones. He'd look at the question, look at Zaire, and put the notepad down, which said something too. The boys adjusted to his presence the way children adjust to fixtures, gradually and then completely. Micah brought a rock he'd apparently decided was remarkable and placed it on the step next to Zaire without explanation. Solomon asked him, via handwritten note passed through Selim, whether he knew what the largest river in Africa was. Zaire answered correctly. Solomon looked neither impressed nor disappointed, just nodded and went back to his book. Ezra continued to maintain his position. Present, watchful, never fully closing the distance and never moving entirely away. Power feels strongest right before it realizes it's wrong. That matters here, because Zaire was still operating from the assumption that he was the one in control of what was happening, that he was the one choosing the pace, that he was gathering information toward a conclusion he would then act on in whatever way he decided. But what was actually happening, what he couldn't see from inside it, was that the children were teaching him something. Not deliberately, just by being themselves. Ezra's instinctive calm, Solomon's precision, Micah's careful hands. 3 modes of being that lived somewhere in Zaire's own chest in forms he'd compressed over decades into something barely recognizable. Keston noticed. He came on day 11. Parked behind Zaire's SUV. Walked up to the stone wall. Stood beside his brother for about 40 minutes without saying anything. Then, on the way back to the cars. You know what you're looking at. Not a question. Zaire didn't answer. Zaire. Keston stopped walking. You already know. I don't have confirmation. You have enough. They stood in the road. You've been coming here every day for 2 weeks, Keston said. That's not an investigation. That's something else. Zaire looked at the house. The light was going. One small silhouette moved past a window. Micah, probably the careful one, putting things away. I'm going to ask him, Zaire said. When? Tonight. He went back up the path alone. Selim was on the porch. The boys were inside. He could hear them through the screen door. Solomon counting. Ezra correcting the count in a voice that had somehow already developed the particular quality of someone who expected to be listened to. Zaire stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. The evening was still. The kind of still that felt like a room waiting. He looked at Selim. Selim looked back. And the question that had been building for 2 weeks, that had started on a balcony 5 years ago with a notepad and 3 words and a closed door, finally came out of him. Low. Direct. No performance in it. Who are they? Selim didn't reach for the notepad. He stood very still. And for the first time since Zaire had appeared at this house, since all of this had begun, Selim's eyes filled with something that was neither defiance nor control. It was the specific pain of someone who had been carrying something enormous for a very long time and had just been asked to set it down. The porch light flickered, one of those old bulbs that needed replacing for months. It buzzed and caught and held, and in that yellowed unsteady light, Zaire and Selim stood 6 feet apart in the most loaded silence either of them had occupied in their lives. The boys were inside. The night was quiet around them. Zaire said nothing else. He'd asked the question. He was waiting. Selim's hand moved toward the notepad on the small porch table. Stopped. Moved back. He stood straight. Looked directly at Zaire. And something shifted in his expression. Not an opening, not a surrender. More like a decision being made in real time, right there between one breath and the next. He didn't reach for the notepad again. Instead he pointed one deliberate finger toward the screen door, then at Zaire, then at himself. 3 gestures, clear as a sentence. They are yours, and mine. The air between them changed completely. Zaire heard it differently than he expected. He'd been running the possibility through his mind for 11 days. He'd built it into his thinking in layers, prepared for it logically, told himself he was ready for it factually. That when confirmation came, he'd process it the way he processed other significant information. With structure, with control. He wasn't ready. At all. His jaw tightened. His hands, usually still, always still, trained into stillness by years of needing people to read calm from him even under pressure, went rigid at his sides. He looked at the screen door. 3 voices inside. Same voices he'd been hearing for 2 weeks, like a sound he couldn't locate the source of. He looked back at Selim. 5 years, he said. The words came out low and stripped of everything except the weight they carried. 5 years you've been here. Selim held his gaze. 5 years and you. He stopped, pressed his lips together, started again differently. Why didn't you? He stopped again, because the question finished itself before he got there. Why didn't you find me? And the answer, the one that Selim's face was already giving, without the notepad, without words, without anything except the absolute clarity of someone who had made a decision and paid for it every single day since, was not the answer Zaire had expected. It wasn't fear. It wasn't strategy. Selim reached for the notepad, wrote 4 words, held it up. You were always surrounded. Zaire read it. Read it again. You were always surrounded. Not by bodyguards. Not by staff. By a world. A power structure, a syndicate framework, a set of loyalties and dangers and interests that had no room in it for a mute omega with 3 children and no leverage and no protection. That was the answer. Zaire had nothing to say to that, because it was true. It sat in the center of his chest like a fact he couldn't argue with, because it was exactly the kind of thing he would have told someone else in a different situation. You don't bring something fragile into a dangerous house just because you want to. You wait until the house is safe. Or you build a different one. The porch light buzzed. Zaire reached into his jacket. He placed an envelope on the porch railing. Selim looked at it. I had it done 3 days ago, Zaire said. Cortez collected samples without you knowing. I'm sorry for that. He paused. I know how that sounds. I'm still sorry. The envelope sat between them. White. Sealed. Slightly worn at the corner from being in his jacket for 3 days. Selim looked at it for a long time. I never forgot you, Zaire said. That landed. He could see it land. In the slight change around Selim's eyes. In the way his jaw shifted. In the long exhale that wasn't quite controlled. 5 years of a certain assumption. The assumption that he had been nothing more than a single evening to a powerful man who moved on to the next thing, cracking at the foundation. Selim's hand moved toward the envelope, stopped, didn't pick it up, and in that hesitation, in the space between reaching and stopping, Zaire understood something new. Something the last 11 days had been building toward without him realizing it. The question was never going to be what the envelope said. The question was always going to be what came after. The screen door creaked. Ezra stood in the doorway, barefoot, pajamas, holding the yellow truck. He looked at Zaire. Looked at his father. Looked at the envelope on the railing. Didn't say anything. Just watched. And the envelope sat there, unopened, in the flickering porch light, carrying the kind of answer that doesn't actually answer anything. He opened it himself. Standing alone in the SUV at the end of the road with the engine off and the night pressing flat against every window. He picked it up from the railing when Selim turned to take Ezra back inside. Didn't ask. Didn't explain. Just took it, walked down the path, got in the car, opened it, read it, and sat with it for 23 minutes before he started the engine. The test confirmed what Ezra's eyes had told him on day one, what Keston's voice had said on the road, what some deeper layer of his own body had known from the moment he stood at that cracked concrete path and watched 3 boys watch him back. He drove home. He didn't sleep. In the morning, he was back. But the morning felt different. Not because anything visible had changed. Same road, same house, same peeling blue paint catching the early light. The difference was inside him. Something had reorganized overnight. The investigator's posture he'd been carrying for 2 weeks, the careful, controlled approach of a man gathering information toward a decision, was gone. What replaced it was harder to name. Heavier. He knocked on the door. Selim opened it. Looked at him. Looked at his face for a long moment. Then stepped back and let him in. That was the first time. Inside, the house was small and worn and completely specifically theirs. A bookshelf that was slightly too tall for the wall and leaned half an inch. A kitchen table with 4 mismatched chairs. Artwork. Children's drawings. Dense with color and detail. Covering most of the lower half of the living room wall like wallpaper chosen by people who understood what mattered. Solomon was at the table, working on something in a notebook. He looked up when Zaire came in, assessed, returned to the notebook. Micah came in from the hallway, stopped, then walked to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water. He sat in front of the empty chair across from Solomon. Not for any particular reason that was explained. Just placed it there. Ezra was not in the room. Zaire sat down. Selim stood in the kitchen doorway. And then Zaire said the thing that had rearranged itself in him overnight. Not an announcement. Not a declaration. He said it quietly to the room, to Selim, to the 2 boys who were present and the one who wasn't. I'm not leaving this time. The room held it. Selim didn't move. Didn't write anything. Didn't nod. Solomon kept writing in his notebook. Micah looked at his water glass. And the silence that followed wasn't hostile or accepting. It was the silence of a situation that understood the weight of what had just been said and was refusing to let anyone off easily. Because this right here was not resolution. Not even close. Truth doesn't fix damage. It reveals it. What Zaire had just walked into wasn't a family that needed him to show up. It was a world that had been built carefully and completely without him. For walls. For chairs at a table. A bookshelf of leaning books. Children who knew how to put things back where they found them and count their own inventory of rocks and ask the right questions through written notes passed through their father's hands. This had been working. Not beautifully. Not easily. But working. And the real question, the one underneath all the DNA and surveillance and 5-year timelines and unopened envelopes, was not are they yours? It was do you deserve to step into something you weren't part of building? Ezra appeared in the doorway. He stood there looking at Zaire the way he always looked at things. Direct, unhurried, deciding. Then he crossed the room. Sat in the chair next to him. Set the yellow truck on the table between them. Didn't say anything. Zaire looked at the truck. At the small hand that had released it. At the 4 mismatched chairs and the leaning bookshelf and the drawings on the wall and Selim standing in the kitchen doorway holding everything together with a silence that had never been emptiness. Had always, every moment, been intention. He felt something move in his throat. He didn't look away from it this time. I know I don't have the right to just step in, he said, slowly, like each word was being selected from a pile he'd been sorting through all night. I know that. I'm not asking for everything at once. Selim finally moved. He came to the table. Sat down. Not across from Zaire beside him. Which was its own kind of answer. Different from yes, different from forgiveness, different from welcome. More like we'll see. More like this is the beginning of something, not the end. He picked up the notepad. Wrote something. slid it across the table. Zaire read it. 3 words this time. Don't prove it. He looked up. Selim held his eyes. Show it. And for the first time in 15 years of running territories and enforcing loyalty and building walls around everything he'd never learned to name, the man who controlled everything sat in a kitchen chair next to a small boy with a yellow truck and understood, fully, that this was something that could not be commanded, could not be acquired, could not be managed into place, could only be earned, one day at a time, in a house with 4 mismatched chairs, and a bookshelf that was still leaning. If this story moved something in you, if you've ever had to choose between protecting someone and letting them in, drop your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you're new here, this channel carries stories that stay with you. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Every story we tell is a chance to see something true about the human heart, and we'd love for you to be here for all of it.